He stood alone beneath a sky split with crimson, where suns wept fire and the warp whispered in tongues older than stars. His flesh shimmered like living glass, eyes aglow with the math of sorcery and the sorrow of knowledge. He was Magnus the Red, the Crimson King, the Cyclopean seer whose betrayal and brilliance echoed still through the hollow bones of Prospero. But across from him now, on a world that should not exist, suspended between dream and battlefield, stood another being. Cloaked in war and born of a shattered land, his eyes were not windows but weapons. The patterns etched upon his skin were not decoration but declaration. Uchiha Madara had come through the veil, not summoned, not demonic, willed. They did not speak, not yet. The wind carried ash from both futures and memories, and the stars blinked, not from distance but dread. This was no mere crossing of blades. This was will against will, curse against vision, war against fate itself. And something watched. In the echoing silence between these titans, history hesitates. You, watching from the shadows of the galaxy or the fragments of Shinobi lore, must choose your place. Subscribe not just to witness this reckoning, but to remember it. Like the echo of a jutsu, like the flare of a sorceress thought, your voice strengthens the vision. Subscribe, share, and remain to the end, for this is not a battle, it is revelation. The moon hung low above the desolate world like a forgotten relic, pockmarked, silent, and rimmed with the red corona of a dying star. Beneath that fractured light where no Vox signal reached and no servitor dared tread, stood Magnus the Red, barefoot upon blackened obsidian, cloak whispering in solar wind. His single eye, gleaming like a furnace trapped behind a sapphire lens, scanned the impossible fissure forming in the void. There was no storm, no psychic scream, no demonic herald, just absence. And then, arrival. A soundless ripple bent the air and bent time. From nothing stepped a figure, armored yet flowing, human in silhouette but immense in presence. The eye of Magnus twitched. The warp did not register him. Not like it should. No demon crowned his soul, no lingering scent of the Astronomicon. The figure walked as if he owned the ground that had not yet known him. Madara Uchiha. His gaze burned not with fire but with judgment. Red circles turned slowly within black eyes, tomoe patterns shifting like orbiting moons. There was intelligence there, sharper than the blades forged in Mars's deepest manufactorums, and something else, purpose unflinching, rage sheathed in discipline. For a moment neither moved. They were statues, gods forgotten by their own myths. Then Madara spoke, voice low, untouched by vox distortion or ambient interference. The words came in a tongue the galaxy had never known, but meaning bled into the warp like ink in water. "You are not the Emperor," he said, almost disappointed. Magnus smiled, not kindly. "I am no throne-bound corpse." But I knew him. Once Madara looked to the stars. This place reeks of oppression. And ghosts, Magnus inclined his head, the movement sending waves through the psychic resonance of the rocks beneath them. Then you'll fit in well. Time, ever obedient to cosmic hierarchy, hesitated. This was not a meeting engineered by fate. This was collision. Madara turned his back and began to walk, boots leaving no prints. Magnus did not follow, yet, but his thoughts stretched forward like serpents, testing the mind of the intruder. It was elusive, not a blank, not a pariah, but layered, protected by technique and arrogance, and beneath that, an abyss. The Crimson King stepped forward. The moons above blinked into eclipses. No alarm sounded from Terra. No custodian blades unsheathed, but in the far, far silence of the Emperor's presence, the air stirred. A whisper passed through the minds of the silent watchers across the Imperium. Not words, not command, but attention. The galaxy, ancient and vast, had noticed. And Madara kept walking. He passed through a dead manufactorum whose cogitators still blinked nonsense code. Data slates crackled at his touch. Servo cranes turned their heads like dying beasts. The statues of saints did not collapse, but they cracked. The mortal echoes of faith did not repel him. They folded, bent. Magnus hovered, following, not in pursuit, not yet, but in curiosity. There was no psionic signature from Madara, and yet the warp recoiled from him as it would a librarian drenched in nullite. But he wasn't null. That much Magnus was certain of. He was something else. Not merely Shinobi. Not merely human. From a ruined window, Magnus watched Madara pass beneath the flaking mural of the Emperor Triumphant. The Uchiha did not glance up. His eyes never left the horizon, as if time were just a veil he could pull aside. Something began to ache within Magnus. Not pain, not fear, something older, recognition not of the man, but of the trajectory. Madara Uchiha was not of this world, that much was clear. But his story, Magnus felt, rhymed with his own. They were both betrayers, both believers, both punished for a clarity no one else dared accept. And now one had crossed universes not with armies, but with intent. A pulse of warp energy tickled the edge of Madara's shoulder as Magnus tested his perimeter. The psychic edge should have bitten, should have scraped chakra or soul. But it met nothing. An eye turned, not his visible eye, the other one. The one embedded like a curse beneath Madara's brow. It saw Magnus. And Magnus stepped back. There are weapons built for killing gods. Madara, it seemed, had brought none. He was the weapon. As twilight settled into the bone hollows of the ruined city, Madara paused on a bridge of broken steel. Beneath it flowed a river of data oil and corpse sediment. He looked down at his reflection. For a moment his face shimmered, not as an illusion, but as if this world struggled to render him fully, as if reality considered rejecting his presence. He stared at his face and whispered, almost too soft to hear, "Hashirama, this world will never see you, but they will know me." The reflection smiled. Madara did not. Behind him, Magnus stepped into visibility. "You shouldn't be here," the Primarch said, not with threat, with awe. Madara turned. "Yet here I am." In that instant, they were two continents colliding beneath the ocean, unaware of the tidal waves rising from their tremor. A battle would come. That was certain. But first would come understanding. The stars above did not blink. In this part of space they watched, steady, cold, unjudging, as if even the firmament was curious about the anomaly walking its forgotten bones. Madara did not marvel. He measured. With each step deeper into this galaxy, he cataloged contradiction. The Imperium was a fortress built on paradox. It claimed order, yet breathed chaos. It worshipped a silent emperor, yet silenced those who dared understand him. It built its glory on the bones of billions and called it duty. And Madara understood that. Not because he agreed, but because he had once done the same. He moved silently through the ruins of a once active Hive satellite, orbiting an abandoned forge moon. No alarms tripped. No Auspex scanners registered his passage. His chakra cloaked him, repelling vox pings and spectral reeds like wind bends around stone. Only the rats saw him, and they, sensing something older than predators, fled. Through fractured windows, the void loomed. Distant planets like burning cinders and spires of orbital debris haloing the atmosphere. In his world, the sky was blue. Here, it bled. Inside a still-functioning chapel of the ecclesiarchy, he paused. Rows of pews stretched toward a shattered altar where the aquila still hung, half gold, half char. Devotees long turned to dust had left behind prayers etched into the very walls, scratched in desperation. They prayed for deliverance, for light, for annihilation. Madara touched one carving, the etching sharp even through the grime. He who watches must never wake. He understood the irony immediately. Faith that feared its god, devotion tempered by dread. How many times had Konoha's people feared the very protectors who bled for them? He looked upon the aquila again. So much like Konoha, he murmured, but without the pretense of peace. Magnus watched from a height, barely a silhouette between broken gears. He studied Madara's every step, not for advantage, but comprehension. This was no rogue psyker, no shard of chaos sent to mislead or corrupt. Madara operated on a principle Magnus had long buried: control, not through suppression, through understanding. Will. But what was his end? That question pulled at the Crimson King's mind like a thorn. Buried deep in psychic flesh, why had this being crossed time, space, and metaphysics? Curiosity? Power? Escape? Magnus needed to know. On the second night, aboard a derelict astropathic relay drifting in void orbit, he made himself known again. Madara stood amid a nest of cracked Vox towers, each pulsing faint light, like stars struggling to forget. He turned before Magnus spoke. "You've been watching." "I am ever curious," Magnus replied, folding his arms, crimson armor glowing faintly. "Especially when the stars themselves blink at your presence." Madara considered that. And what do they see, these stars? A question I've asked myself for 10,000 years. A silence settled, not empty, heavy, like the breath before an answer no one wishes to hear. Madara stepped closer to the edge, looking down into void. "Your world is loud, this galaxy. Faith, war, hierarchy. None of it breathes unless strangled Magnus joined him. We did not choose it. We inherited it, shaped it, broke it, like I broke mine," Madara said softly. There it was, not admission, not regret, just truth, spoken like stone laid on a grave. Magnus turned, one eye gleaming. "You lost everything, didn't you?" Madara's smile was thin. "No, I gave it away. To prove a point, a pause, then the Primarch spoke with an old ache. "And did you?" "No." The stars at last seemed to move, not because of orbital drift, but because reality was shifting. Between these two, the air began to curl, thoughts and half-formed energies brushing against each other like twin moons nearly colliding. Madara turned, cloak drifting behind him like smoke in wind. "You are a god, then?" Magnus laughed once. "No, merely the son of one. A broken one, a puppet once, a traitor, always." Madara nodded, not in agreement but understanding. "Power that isn't trusted becomes threat. Even in your world, that truth holds. There is no trust in this galaxy," Magnus replied. "Only survival." "And yet here you are," Madara said, "still watching, still speaking. You want something." Magnus did not deny it. "Perhaps you are the only mind in 10,000 years not shaped by our failures. You stand outside it, and perhaps I need to see what that looks like." Madara narrowed his eyes. "Then show me." A flick of chakra, a flare of warp. Their hands never moved, but space warped between them. In that instant, Madara saw it. A city golden and red, layered in impossible geometry, towers of light, libraries of psionic resonance, people who moved like thought and danced through knowledge. Prospero, But it was not real. It shimmered behind Magnus's eyes, and with a thought, the Primarch offered the memory, not as illusion, not as trick, but as invitation. Madara did not flinch. He stepped forward, and the stars blinked again. This time not from awe, from fear. The light was soft, too soft for a real world. It filtered through tall, arched windows made of nothing, casting shadows that did not belong to objects. Floors shimmered as if made of cooled glass, but beneath the transparency, memories flickered. Scenes, perhaps, or ghosts. Madara stood at the edge of the grand scholarium, gazing upward. Prospero. He had no word for it in his own tongue. Not quite. But the meaning reached him nonetheless. A place of mind, a place of flame, a city not built from stone or chakra or command, but from a species yearning to be more than blood and blade. It reminded him faintly of ancient Konoha. Before the endless wars, before the first Hokage fell, when hope still laced the trees, but this was no village hidden in leaf. The towers spiraled like equations etched in fire, bridges arced with silver runes. Statues watched, all weeping ash, men, women, children, all cast in impossible perfection. And above it all, high in the air where no sky belonged, floated a sun that pulsed like a beating heart. Red, immense, alive. It did not warm. It remembered. Magnus walked beside him in silence, the hem of his cloak sweeping across memory. "This is Prospero," the Primarch said at last, "as it was. As I recall it. As it might never have been." Madara reached out toward a railing and touched it. It held weight, texture, cold, then warm, then neither. Illusion, number, not quite. A projection? A memory laced with psychic density, dream made interactive. "You built this?" Madara asked. "My people did," Magnus replied, voice low. "Before they burned it. Before I did, they walked in silence through a corridor of suspended manuscripts, each tome floating midair, bound by thought, whispering in tongues only minds could hear. Madara did not read them. He did not trust them. Some voices echoed too long. "I came to understand something," Magnus said softly, "after its fall. Truth is weightless when carried alone, but belief, real belief. It burns." Madara said nothing, but his eyes moved, noting everything. The symmetry of the halls, the absence of dust, the way none of the people in this vision moved. Yet their poses screamed frozen grief. A woman reaching upward, a child curled around a book, a man standing at a lectern, mouth agape forever. "They're not real," Magnus said before he could ask. "I could not bring them back, even in memory. This is the shape of my guilt." They came to a library that had no walls, just shelves floating in infinity. Pages turned themselves, stirred by a wind of thought. Above them, constellations flickered that had never existed in real space. Madara looked up and for a moment saw a face in the stars. It looked like his brother. It wasn't. "You lost family," Magnus said, reading it from him. "Didn't you?" Madara's expression did not change. "I was my family. And now? Now I am the result." The silence between them stretched like a bridge between ruined towers. Magnus exhaled, though he did not need breath here. "I offered peace. I offered truth. I offered evolution," Magnus said, "and they feared me." "They always do," Madara replied. For a time they wandered, not as friends, not as enemies, as reflections navigating another man's ruin. Madara paused beside a fountain where the water flowed upward. Within it danced images, the siege of Terra, all blurred, abstracted, like someone trying not to remember. Madara stared. "These events are real?" "They were," Magnus said, "or they will be." Memory does not obey time. Madara stepped away. Neither do I. The world around them pulsed once, then again. The rhythm began to falter. You're straining it, Magnus warned. I'm not, Madara replied, brow furrowing. Something else is. In the far corners of the illusory city, things began to move. Not people, not demon, shapes, ideas, raw emotions struggling to form. Fear, anger, doubt, they slithered along the walls like cracks in a mirror, warping the illusion. Statues turned to face them. Books snapped shut. The sun above dimmed to a crimson glare. They found us, Magnus said. Not the Imperium, not the legions, the warp. It doesn't like this memory. Why? Because it wasn't born here. It wasn't shaped by pain. The light above screamed. A silent psychic howl, and in the center of the plaza they had just crossed, a fissure opened in the stone. From it poured color. Not black, not darkness. Color, moving, writhing, alive. Madara instinctively drew his energy close, forming the first lines of Susanoo. Not fully summoned, not yet. Just presence. Just threat. Magnus flared with warp light, his staff materializing in one hand. The illusion of Prospero shuddered, and somewhere above, a voice they could not understand, older than language, whispered from the warp. It did not speak to them, it accused them. Madara stepped forward. End it! Magnus blinked. What? This memory. It's a trap. Magnus hesitated. Then, with a single gesture, the city folded inward. Towers curled like burning paper, statues melted, the sun collapsed into a point, and in a blink they were standing again atop the relay platform beneath real stars amidst real silence. Madara exhaled slowly. Even your illusions remember pain. Magnus didn't answer. He was still seeing it. The warp had whispered something else as they left. It had whispered his name. Not Madara's. Not Magnus's. A new name. A name neither had spoken, but both would soon come to understand. The wind on the forge moon was sharp, laced with metallic dust and memory. Rusted spires of forgotten industry reached toward the void like frozen screams, and fractured aqueducts bled silent vapor trails into the lower atmosphere. No one lived here. Nothing moved, save for the slow turning of decayed cogitators still grinding their teeth in sleep, waiting for orders from a command no longer issued. It was here in this ruin of silence and steel that the two met again. They stood on a platform overlooking a dead manufactorum. Its skeletal gantries collapsed across an ocean of rust. Neither wore the guise of subtlety anymore. Magnus tall as myth, eyes afire with restrained potential. Madara, cloak still as stone, his gaze unreadable beneath the storm shadow of his brow. This time they spoke not from curiosity, but necessity. There's something beneath all of this, Madara said, his voice like stone dragged across obsidian. I saw it in the cracks of your illusion. Something the warp fears. Magnus nodded once. An artifact. Perhaps. A machine. Perhaps. I know it only by name. The memory engine. Madara's gaze narrowed. Where? Here. Beneath the crust of this world, sealed by the dark mechanicum during the heresy, lost when they turned on each other. Some say it holds every possible timeline of mankind, fractured, broken, repeating. Others say it was built to find a better one, a god machine. Madara muttered. A lie detector for fate, Magnus corrected, voice grim. And if it still stirs, then the warp has reason to tremble. For a time they said nothing more. The air smelled of burning iron and ancient oil, the kind that had bled through 1,000 corpses. Below them, nothing stirred, but the shadows were beginning to change. Not physically, emotionally. A weight pressed down on the world, like thought becoming heavy. Madara turned toward the descent shaft. a ruinous spiral that dropped into the forge's undercore. We retrieve it. Together? Magnus asked. Madara did not respond. He simply stepped forward. Magnus followed. The descent was not clean. The tunnels fought them, not with traps or machines, but with memory. Each level seemed layered with forgotten screams, looping cries of dying tech priests, vox logs repeating final prayers. One wall wept blood, another played a lullaby in binary. Somewhere far below, a mechanical voice still recited an inventory of tools it would never again use. "This place is cracked," Madara said. "It was broken before it was ever built," Magnus replied. "Forge worlds are like psychers. Some are born insane. Others become it. In the 29th sublevel, they found the doors, massive vault-like. Shaped in the image of the double-headed eagle, though one head had long since been melted away, sigils of sealing glowed faintly in the dark, not imperial, not chaos, something in between, symbols that denied time rather than feared it. Magnus stepped forward, placing a hand on the metal. The doors did not resist, they shuddered. Not physically, emotionally, as if memory itself flinched. Madara drew a breath and reached for his own center, calling forth the specter of his chakra. Not to break, but to reinforce. Around them, the temperature dropped. Then the doors opened. The chamber beyond was not a room. It was a chasm, a vast hollow expanse, the size of a pre-fall stadium, walls lined with layered projection discs and floating node chains, each one humming with unfired potential. In the center, hovering in a state of serene decay, was the engine. Not a machine in the traditional sense. No gears, no vox, no interface. Just a lattice of light, spinning fractal geometries inside a sphere of silence. It pulsed not with power, but questions. Madara took a single step inside. His eyes widened. "This," he breathed. "This remembers me." Magnus followed, brow furrowed. "Explain." "I don't belong here," Madara said. "I should not be readable. Not by your systems, not by your data spirits, but this thing. It recognizes my shape, my thought. It's reacting to me." Indeed, the sphere was pulsing brighter now. Colors began to change, from crimson to cobalt, then to a color neither of them had a name for. Magnus raised his hand and felt the presence within the sphere. It wasn't sentient. It was aware, like a mirror that had started dreaming of what it might reflect. A tendril of light uncoiled from the lattice. It touched Madara's forehead, and he fell. Not physically, internally. Madara staggered once, then dropped to one knee. His eyes were wide open, and yet he did not see the room. He saw everything. 1,000 possibilities, 1,000,000 broken futures, Konoha falling to plague. Shinobi worlds bound in chains of logic and servitude, Terra burning not from war but from redefinition, the Emperor speaking, not with words but code. Then he saw himself, standing upon a throne not of chakra or blood, but memory, a throne built from choices never made. Magnus tried to break the contact, but the light gripped Madara tighter. A scream built in his chest, not of pain, of recognition. When the light withdrew, Madara collapsed forward, panting. His fingers clawed the metal floor like a man surfacing from drowning. Magnus knelt beside him. "What did it show you?" Madara looked up, eyes blazing. "A war," he whispered, "between dreams and doctrines." A silence fell, heavier than before, not dread, not awe, preparation. The chamber no longer pulsed with neutrality. The memory engine had awakened. Its lattice of impossible shapes now whirled in sharp, angular tempo, not chaotic but purposeful. As if the arrival of something beyond both flesh and warp had unlocked a new rhythm. Madara stood again, taller now, though dust still clung to his knees. His eyes were not dazed. They were calibrating. As if every image that had passed through him was now being refiled, reordered, dissected with surgical intent. Magnus observed him with the gaze of a scholar, but his hands trembled slightly against the haft of his staff. Not from fear, from memory. He had seen this before, a mind opening too quickly, a soul racing ahead of its body. "Speak," Magnus said, voice low. "Tell me what you saw." Madara did not look at him. Instead, he stepped forward, gaze locked on the latticework sphere. "Somewhere I led your legions, somewhere you stood beside me on my world, teaching Shinobi the logic of the warp. I saw the death of stars, the return of gods, the death of gods who refused to return." He paused. "I saw your father fall." Magnus did not flinch. "He does not fall. He simply waits." "No," Madara said sharply, turning now. "He falls. In more timelines than he stands, because he cannot imagine anyone else rising." Silence fell like ash. Madara continued pacing slowly around the engine. "In one timeline, the great clans of my world came through first. They reshaped your Astra Militarum into chakra-bound dynasties. The warp bent, not in chaos, in obedience. In others, your emperor replaced the Sage of Six Paths. In still more, I destroyed both worlds, not out of hatred. Out of disinterest." Magnus's voice was colder now. "These are illusions. Branches, not truths. Possibilities are truths unborn," Madara replied. "And this machine is their womb." He reached out and touched one of the floating lattice nodes. The shape within responded. It unfolded like a flower blooming in reverse. Images spilled outward, not into the air but into the mind, filtered directly into the part of the soul that once believed in futures. One showed the fall of Prospero again, but this time it was defended, not by the Thousand Suns, but by Uchiha. Another showed Konoha as a void world, its forests replaced with basalt pillars, its shinobi wielding silences and purity seals. Children were raised by servitors. Clans bore Achilles over their foreheads. The Sharingan was studied in the Scholastia Sicana. Madara's fingers curled into a fist. "This is not prophecy," he growled. "This is theft." "No," Magnus whispered, stepping forward now, placing a hand upon the engine's surface. "It is warning." Another image. Madara alone, standing on Mars, his eyes burning with fire not his own, leading the Skitarii into battle against the Aeldari pantheon. No shinobi beside him, no allies, only echoes of the Mechanicum whispering equations in his bones. Another, Magnus, throne-bound in chains of green light, held in place by a construct of chakra and seal script. Before him knelt Madara, older, broken, whispering forgiveness. Both men recoiled. The engine dimmed. Madara spoke slowly. "This is a weapon." Magnus nodded. "Yes, but not one we control." For a moment they stood in silence, surrounded by futures unspooling behind their eyes. Then the engine shifted again. This time it reached into Madara, so not through chakra, not through psychic force, but through pattern. It recognized something buried deep within him. A resonance, not born of this galaxy. Something began to upload. Madara staggered slightly and Magnus reached out instinctively, bracing him. "What is it?" he demanded. Madara's lips moved slowly. "Not a memory, not an image. A name, a name." Madara nodded. "A real one. Something hidden, not shown, encoded." He looked up, and for the first time since his arrival, doubt flickered behind his eyes. "The engine is not showing us possibilities anymore," he said. "It's seeking, searching, comparing timelines, trying to stabilize them." Magnus pulled his hand away from the lattice. Why? Madara turned toward him slowly. Because it thinks we're a correction. The word lingered in the air like smoke after a fire. Magnus stepped back. That would mean that this galaxy has already collapsed, Madara finished. Not physically. Narratively, something high above them groaned. The chamber began to vibrate softly like an organ stirred to wakefulness. The machine wants us to duel, Madara said suddenly. Magnus's eye narrowed. What? It's the convergence point. In every timeline it tried to stabilize, we fight. Not just as conflict, as anchor. It's trying to ride us into canon. Magnus turned toward the engine. Then we destroy it. But even as he said it, he knew he wouldn't. Not yet. The memory of Prospero still whispered in his mind. But now, it whispered in Madara's voice. Far away on Terra, a data slate flickered without being touched, and in the deepest vaults beneath the Imperial Palace, a servitor froze in mid-function, its optic lenses flickering red. A single phrase scrolled across its blank screen. Uchiha recognized. Cross-realm entity. Contingency required. The Forge Moon's core trembled, not from tectonic collapse or explosive charge, but from potential, from the unbearable weight of what might be. Above the memory engine, invisible fields of reality flexed and recoiled, struggling to digest what had occurred. The presence of two impossibilities, one born of the warp, the other of chakra, had become intolerable to the laws that governed fate. The galaxy, it seemed, demanded tension. Madara stood at the edge of the chamber, his arms crossed behind his back, staring into the dark. The shifting geometries of the engine no longer cast reflection on his skin. They bent around him now like matter giving reverence to mass. Magnus watched him from across the hollow. Their alliance had thinned. Words had been exchanged after the engine dimmed. Not with volume, but with edges. Not insult, not betrayal, but something subtler. A peeling away of shared purpose. Madara had seen too much. Magnus had remembered too deeply, and both had come to the same truth. Only one of them would leave meaning behind. You believe this engine wants to stabilize your empire, Madara said at last. But it has no loyalty to gold. Magnus's voice was soft. You think it's shaping your destiny? I think, Madara replied, it's choosing between us. Silence. Then Magnus stepped forward, the light of his eye burning. There's a reason it showed us timelines where we destroy one another. It fears the fusion of our powers more than our conflict. Or perhaps, Madara murmured, it simply understands that when two minds refuse compromise, only combat can define which one is real. At that, the Crimson King smiled, not kindly. And you're ready? I have always been, Madara answered, but neither moved. Not yet. The memory engine flickered behind them, casting long, thin shadows that moved of their own accord. Somewhere in its lattice, a strand snapped, not from pressure but from decision. A signal pulsed outward, unreadable by servitors, missed by the Voxnet, but felt. On Terra, a psyker collapsed screaming, eyes boiling from within. On Mars, a Skitarii priest began praying to a name that had never existed. In the Black Library, a tome unwrote a page and left it blank in anticipation. And on the Forge Moon, two legends prepared to fracture. Madara stepped forward. Where? He asked. Magnus tilted his head. You wish to choose the ground? Madara's eyes gleamed. Not ground, meaning Magnus extended one hand, and a thought passed from his mind into the world. In an instant they stood upon a dead star's crust, hollowed long ago by Aeldari sorcery and Mechanicus greed. The surface was hard glass, smooth and black, cracked only by lines of faint warp energy seeping upward like breath from a corpse. Above them, stars spiraled like slow-motion weapons. There was no sound, only the tension of thought. Madara turned once in a circle, cloak whispering, "This will do." Magnus summoned his staff from the air, its runes flaring. But still, no battle, no leap, no charge. They spoke again. "You see the Emperor as tyrant," Madara said. "And you see your world's peace as justice," Magnus countered. "I brought unity through truth. You enforced peace through power. I spared my people war. You defined them by it." Madara's eyes narrowed. "And you?" "You burned your own home. I loved it too much to let it rot quietly." Their words carried weight like gravity condensed in syllables. The engine was gone, but its pulse still echoed. It wanted resolution, not for logic, for continuity. Madara's hand moved. The spectral ribcage of Susanoo bloomed around him in an instant, half-translucent, blue as a drowned god, a hand extended, holding nothing yet. Magnus floated upward, crimson energy wrapping his limbs, his cloak becoming wings of flame. His third eye, invisible to mortals, burned open across his brow. "I will not strike first," Magnus said. "Then you will lose," Madara whispered. And then, contact. Not with blade, not with force, but with idea. The first blow was perception. Magnus bent the laws of causality, showing Madara 1,000 futures in which he failed. Not illusions. Statistical truths dragged from the warp, encoded in mathematics, burned into the soul. Madara reeled, but he rewrote them. With chakra as ink and rage as quill, he carved a new possibility across Magnus's spell. In that world, he won. In that world, the Primarch bled. The glass beneath them cracked. Susanoo raised its hand, and Magnus struck it with lightning forged from betrayed prophecy. The clash made no sound, only consequence. Time slowed. Not as a power, as a side effect. Each move now bent chronology. Each strike sent ripples backward through their own lives. Magnus relived the burning of Prospero. Inverted. Madara tasted the betrayal at the Valley of the End. Reversed. Each man became the other for fragments of a second. They did not fight to destroy, they fought to define. Then, they stopped. One breath, one heartbeat. Madara stood in place, hair swaying, eyes locked. Magnus hovered above the glass, his armor scorched, his staff dimmed. They were not yet broken, but neither was whole. A pause stretched. Then Madara said low, "Not here." Magnus nodded once. "No. The galaxy would not understand. Their duel would come. Must come. But this was not the stage, not yet." And far beneath the surface, the memory engine hummed. Recording, waiting, ready. The veil between realities frayed, not torn, not broken. Loosened. As if some ancient hand, far beyond either warrior's reach, had tugged gently at the edges of the galaxy and whispered, "Make space," and so it did. The world that formed next was not mapped in any stellar chart, not registered in any Mechanicus archive or Eldari ruin. It was not a moon, not a planet. It was permission, a construct of thought, orbiting nothing, built not of matter but of invitation, a battleground not for armies but for concepts. Here, in this space between spaces, reality was pliable, and it waited. Madara stepped onto its surface first. Beneath his feet, the ground shifted in hue, not color, but intention. Stone became chakra-reactive sand, then metal laced with sigils, then simply darkness made solid. He did not react, not. His eyes, the eternal Mangekyo and the Rinnegan layered within, adjusted immediately, mapping the world's truth from within. It was empty. No cities, no ruins, no witnesses, a theater crafted for judgment. He turned as Magnus arrived, the Primarch descending in a shimmer of red flame and silence. Magnus did not touch the ground. He floated, an idea given form, his massive frame haloed by firelight, the color of fallen memory. The eye of Magnus burned above his brow, an open flame that did not flicker, only watched. "This is not a real world," Madara said. "No," Magnus agreed, "but it knows what real is." The plain stretched to infinity, yet felt enclosed. There were no stars, only echoes, no sun, only illumination without source, and above them something pulsed behind the layers of false sky. Not an eye, not a god, just expectation, a sense that the universe itself had drawn in a breath. Madara paced slowly, fingers flexing once. "I feel it," he muttered. "Here, I can imagine the shape of every attack before I form it." As if the world begs to be impressed, Magnus nodded. "This is where causality comes to negotiate." They moved apart, not by command but instinct, forming the invisible orbit of the inevitable. The first motion of a duel, though no weapons yet hummed in the air. "I once believed," Magnus said, "that there could be a balance between power and truth. That if one sought knowledge humbly, the galaxy would respond in kind." "And what did it give you?" Madara asked. "Chains. Fire." Silence. Madara's cloak rippled slightly. "Then we share the same disappointment." A flicker rippled through the sky, not lightning, something older. A streak of potential snapping loose and vanishing before it could name itself. The ground beneath them began to respond, not quake, not collapse. Respond symbols appeared, seared into the world's crust. One side burning with glyphs of the Great Crusade, the other in strange spirals of chakra script, not drawn by either of them, but summoned by balance. "This world wants our story written into it," Magnus murmured. "And then judged," Madara replied. A susurrus echoed across the horizon, as if time itself whispered, "Begin." Madara raised his hand. Susanoo bloomed again, more defined this time. Full armor, spear in one hand, shield in the other. Its eyes glowed like twin suns beneath midnight. Magnus unfurled his wings, not feathered but formed of telepathic fire. His staff rotated slowly in his hand, inscribed with fragments of Prospero's last language. Still, no strike. Instead, the air itself folded once. A test. The world did not resist, it anticipated. Madara spoke first. "In this place, death will mean nothing." "Then neither will victory," Magnus replied. And still they stood, tension mounting, power rising, but held in restraint, not from doubt, from precision. Because in this space, every gesture would carry absolute consequence. They would not fight out of pride. They would fight out of necessity. But before the spark, before the first breath of war could be released, the world shifted, just enough to be noticed, a tremor, psychic and emotional. Magnus turned his eye upward. "Something watches." Madara's gaze narrowed. "The memory engine?" "No." They looked skyward. The false sky thinned, not breaking, not collapsing, just revealing depth. And behind it, something older than Mechanicum data, older than the warp, older than chakra. A shadow that was not cast, a presence that had no name. Madara felt it first, not as threat, but as curiosity. Something measuring him. Magnus knew it next, not as enemy, but as editor. The world was not their opponent, it was their audience, and it hungered for resolution. But resolution would only come through fire. Madara took one breath. Magnus closed his eye. and the stage was set. They would not fight now, not yet, but soon. And when they did, the world that should not be would become the only one that mattered. The world trembled without moving. There was no wind, no quake, no celestial shift, and yet the plane knew that the moment had arrived, not with fanfare or battle cries, with silence. With a pause that carried more weight than any weapon. Magnus hovered above the dark plain, his wings of etheric fire spread wide, casting long shadows across the void sky. The air around him vibrated with psychic pressure, a slow, steady hum like a cathedral organ playing a note that only the soul could hear. His armor no longer gleamed, it glowed, etched with runes that shifted between meanings, each sigil a memory, a warning, a curse. Madara stood opposite him, silent as a tomb. Susanoo towered behind him now in its complete form, armored head to toe in crystalline energy, carrying a blade that shimmered with chakra so dense it warped space around the edge. Madara's Rinnegan pulsed, each ripple across his eye dragging fragments of truth from the fabric of this world. They did not speak. There was no need. This was not a fight for power. This was definition. Magnus moved first. Not a lunge, not a charge, but a thought cast outward. A spear of psychic force erupted toward Madara, crimson and gold, the color of dying hope. The Susanoo raised its blade and swept it aside, not blocking, but recontextualizing the energy, transforming its vector mid-air, turning Magnus's strike into a storm of needles that spun back toward the Primarch. Magnus caught them in a shell of fire, absorbing their momentum, twisting their form, and cast them downward into the crust. The ground ignited, a ring of flame and broken time spread from the impact. Madara vanished. No sound, no flare, just gone. Then, behind Magnus, a hand charged with raw chakra burst from beneath the surface, reaching toward his heel. Magnus reflexively phase-shifted, his body blurring into warp particles, but Madara's touch had already marked the spot. And from that point, a gravity seal exploded outward, freezing the warp flux mid-transition. Caught between forms, Magnus twisted. He burned backward, releasing an arc of golden energy that bent like a serpent and struck Madara's ribs. Susanoo shuddered but held. Then came the counter. Madara weaved 4 signs, faster than thought, and the sky screamed open. Not physically, but ideologically. The space above them fractured into shards of possibility. 1,000 outcomes rained down. Visions of Magnus falling, burning, weeping, erased. Each one a hypothetical turned into a blade. Magnus flared. His psychic field erupted, pushing back against reality's intrusion. He focused not on defense, but on domination. His third eye opened fully, revealing the warp sigil beneath his brow, and with it came the spell of refusal. A thought so dense it denied the future itself. Half the visions vanished. The rest struck him like truths. The Primarch reeled, thrown back through air that wasn't air, landing on both feet in a crater that hadn't existed until the moment remembered it. Blood traced his lip. Madara landed a moment later, expression unreadable. "You've seen many futures," Magnus said, wiping the blood with one finger, "but none where you understand why I fell." "I saw all I needed to," Madara answered. Their clash resumed, not with flares of power, but forms, combat condensed into poetry. Madara's blade danced through formations lost to Shinobi history, each strike flowing like river water around a stone. The stone being Magnus, unyielding, channeling warp into martial precision. No wasted movement, no showmanship. Every block was an answer, every strike a thesis. The world around them twisted with each blow. Time spasmed, space fractured, a mountain formed and died in a blink beside them. A memory of a battlefield that never was. Magnus reached into Madara's mind mid-strike, not to crush but to reveal, casting the vision of Konoha rebuilt under imperial law, Shinobi as Psyker novitiates, the Hokage throne replaced with a golden Aquila. Madara's fury cracked the world. With a roar, he surged forward, chakra igniting like blue wildfire. He wanted Magnus to see not rejection, not chaos, but conviction. That his path was not rebellion, but remaking. "I would rule this galaxy not with lies, but law," he said, clashing again. "Not blind loyalty, clarity." "And I," Magnus countered, voice rising with psychic tremor, "would teach it to see without chains." Their power crested. The battlefield buckled. Susanu's blade met Magnus's flame in a single cataclysmic convergence. The shockwave blasted outward, shearing the ground into plateaus and trenches of glass. Fractured glyphs lit the sky like meteors. Time cracked for an instant, and in that crack they both fell, not defeated, falling inward into memory. For a heartbeat that lasted lifetimes, they stood in a place between self. Seeing not each other's techniques, but histories, Madara saw a boy, red-skinned and alone, begging his father for wisdom and receiving silence. Magnus saw a child beneath a red moon, grasping for peace, then for war, then for nothing. Then they returned. Breathing heavy, weapons dimmed, they had not finished, but something had changed. Not between them. Within them, they no longer saw each other as interlopers. They saw each other as warnings. The dust did not settle. It lingered mid-air, suspended in the gravity well of unresolved judgment. The battlefield, no longer pristine, no longer abstract, bore the wounds of gods that refused to kneel. Slashes in reality had not healed. They had learned. Runes etched themselves into the earth with no author. The sky, once blank and impartial, now carried veins of light pulsing with breathless anticipation. Magnus stood at the far edge, his breath slowed, not from fatigue but from restraint. His eye no longer burned. It watched. The fire surrounding him now flickered with introspection, not wrath. And behind his silence brewed something dangerous. Empathy, a thing he had not felt in an opponent for millennia. Madara was no less still. He stood with his arms folded, Rinnegan quiet but not asleep. The Susanoo had faded, its energy absorbed back into his frame, not as surrender but focus. His expression was unreadable, a cliff face before the storm. They had crossed a threshold, not of power, of understanding. And now they spoke. "You carry the weight of a broken empire," Madara said, his voice level, almost contemplative, "but it was never yours to fix." Magnus replied, low, measured. "No more than peace was yours to manufacture. You speak of peace as if it were fiction." "In this galaxy?" Magnus asked with a soft breath. "It is." Madara stepped forward, each footfall deliberate. "Yet you fought for it." "You died for it, and so did you," Magnus countered. They closed the distance between them not with speed, but inevitability. Their words became blows, their philosophies weapons. "You had power," Madara said, "and chose servitude." "I chose loyalty," Magnus replied, and was given punishment." "You had knowledge," Madara growled, "and still bowed." "I bowed," Magnus whispered, "to save them." Madara's eyes flashed. "And they burned you for it." The air throbbed. The silence between each word became more lethal than a strike. The battlefield held its breath as if fearing which ideology would collapse first under its own weight. Magnus gestured, and behind him rose the image of Prospero once more, no longer whole, no longer hopeful. Just ashes and flame, statues shattered, children silenced, wisdom erased. "They feared what I taught," he said, not to Madara but to the world, "because I believed minds should be free, not shackled by dogma, not blinded by faith. They wanted control. They called it loyalty." Madara did not look away. I believed in peace, he said, quiet, and they spat on it. I gave them structure, order. They called it tyranny, you imposed it. They needed it. They needed choice. They needed purpose. The visions erupted again. Madara's dream world bloomed behind him. A shinobi realm stretched across galaxies, law and legacy, chakra flowing through worlds like ley lines of clarity. No heresy, no cults, just unity. His face etched into obelisks, his name spoken as code and creed. Magnus stared, eye flickering with flame. No humanity, he murmured. No divergence. No doubt, no chaos, Madara corrected, and no freedom. They stood in the center of a moral supernova, each reflecting the other, each refusing collapse. Not because they were blind, but because they had seen too much. Then, words failed, and power spoke again. Madara surged forward, and in the span of a blink, the battlefield warped. Each step he took collapsed the space beneath him, turning solid ground into memory. He struck not with blade, but with symbol, summoning chakra chains shaped like commandments, aiming to bind Magnus not physically, but ideologically. Magnus responded with psionic purity, no gestures, just denial. He unraveled the chains mid-air, transforming their structure into warp script, and rewrote them. Now they looped around Madara, whispering the Emperor's own edicts into his ear. Madara tore through them with will alone. Each strike now bore narrative. Madara attacked with structure, forms, sequences, legacy encoded in chakra discipline. Magnus defended with fluidity, rewriting, subverting, warping intent to reveal contradiction. Neither overpowered the other. They debated through destruction. Order without understanding is stagnation, Magnus spat. Freedom without anchor is anarchy, Madara roared. Again, impact. The clash shook the world, and somewhere above, beyond the false sky, the memory engine blinked, observing, recording, adapting. Madara lunged with a piercing thrust, his chakra shaped into a spear of eternal causality. Magnus caught it mid-flight, not with hand, but with sight. His third eye flared, and he showed Madara a world where his peace won, where Shinobi ruled every corner of the stars, and in that world Madara sat alone, no allies, no brothers, no gods, only control. Madara staggered just for a breath, and that breath was all Magnus needed. He struck, not to wound, but to teach. His flame coiled around Madara's mind, whispering futures he had never allowed himself to see. A galaxy that chose to follow, not obey. A humanity that grew not from fear but curiosity. A world without thrones. Madara struck back. His counter was grief, a vision of Konoha in fire, his brother's corpse atop a hill, children slaughtered by indecision, peace, undone by weakness. They were locked now, not in physical contest, but in the most dangerous war of all, justification. And neither yielded, because they couldn't, because to surrender their ideals would be to surrender their meaning. The sky had turned black not with storm, but with judgment. Above the fractured plain, the clouds curled into slow spirals of silent thought, heavy with the dust of dying philosophies. The world, artificial, eternal, designed for duel, now bore the fatigue of its own purpose. Runes once etched into stone had begun to unravel, as if even the laws of this place could no longer endure the argument taking shape below. Madara stood near the edge of a shattered ridge, his back to a monument that hadn't been there moments before, a monument to victory shaped like an empty throne. He said nothing. He didn't need to. His silence had become pressure. Magnus faced him, his wings gone, not dismissed, but burnt away. Ash clung to the curve of his pauldrons, and the psychic fire that had surrounded his form now flickered low like an exhausted hearth. He did not bleed, not physically, but his aura wept. The damage wasn't to his body, it never had been. It was the memory. Madara had learned something few ever had. Magnus, for all his scale and splendor, had a heart unguarded by pride. Where other Primarchs sealed their shame behind defiance or doctrine, Magnus wore his openly, and that was the fracture point. It had begun when Madara had changed tactics. He had ceased attacking with chakra, ceased molding elemental force. He had ceased trying to destroy the Cyclops. Instead, he had reached into his own arsenal of illusion. Not genjutsu in the traditional sense, not manipulation of nerve or sight. Madara had taken Magnus's memories, fragments he had glimpsed in their last collision, and folded them back upon the Primarch like blades. He crafted a vision, a child, red-skinned and alone, holding a book too large for his arms, his eye too bright, his voice too full of questions. "Why can't I speak to the others?" he had asked the towering figures of his past, silent reflections of the Emperor, the thousand sons, the warriors of old Prospero. None answered. They only turned, one by one. Magnus fell to one knee in that illusion. He knew it wasn't real. That didn't matter. The hurt was. "You burn not because they hate you," Madara's voice echoed in the illusion, "but because they feared you would redefine them." Magnus, within the vision, tried to rise. He couldn't. The child in the memory looked at him. Same eye, same frame, only smaller, only broken. "You failed us," the child said. The real Magnus screamed, not aloud but in psychic waveform. The warp cracked above the battlefield as his mind convulsed against itself. The false vision disintegrated. Madara stood on the outside, watching, waiting. He hadn't wanted to break Magnus, he had wanted him to stop pretending. But the shattering had come too fast. Now the Primarch stood, barely composed, eye burning with something ancient. Not pride, not rage, abandonment, and when he spoke it was not the voice of a demigod, it was a whisper. "I tried," Magnus said. "I tried to serve, to save, to teach. I obeyed and I warned, and they still punished me." Madara didn't answer. He didn't have to. The silence said everything. Magnus stepped forward, dragging the haft of his staff behind him. Its light dimmed. His body was upright, but his spirit leaned, bent by the weight of what had been shown to him. Not lies, not fantasy, truth presented through another man's lens, and now it festered. He looked up, his gaze meeting Madara's. "You used my memories against me," he said, not with venom, with awe. "You weaponized pain, like it was yours." "It is," Madara replied. Magnus nodded once. Then his aura shifted. The fire reignited, not wild, not glorious, controlled, tight, cold at the edges. He wasn't healing. He was choosing. "You want me at my worst," Magnus said. Madara's brow furrowed slightly. "No. You want to see what happens when I stop hoping." Madara stepped forward, but only slightly. "That's not—" "You will." And then he let go, not of his power, of his resistance. The warp screamed open around him, not in rage, but in release. No control, no architecture of thought, just raw, burning soul. The eye above his brow flared to nova brightness, and his voice became chorus. Prospero sang through his veins, not as a place, as a curse. He raised his staff, and the ground exploded into impossible geometries. This was not psychic force. This was reversal. Madara braced as reality twisted inward, and Magnus, the broken, the betrayed, moved without hesitation, his strikes now untempered by mercy. Madara had awoken something else, not the Crimson King, not the Cyclops, but the orphan who no longer believed anyone would listen. The duel resumed. Only now it wasn't a duel, it was confession. Each strike Magnus threw was a sentence unfinished, a plea denied, a truth ignored. Each counter Madara offered was survival, not defiance. He had pushed too far, and now he knew it. But it was too late to stop. In the sky, the memory engine did not pulse. It trembled. Below, the false world began to fracture, unable to hold the weight of one man finally being honest. And still, deep in his soul, Madara wondered, was this his victory or his failure? The world was dying, not with grandeur, not with a scream, but with a slow, reverent exhale, the kind that follows the end of a prayer. The plane built for gods could no longer sustain what it had summoned. Cracks spiderwebbed beneath the combatants' feet, but not from pressure, from meaning. Reality itself was collapsing under the weight of resolution. Magnus stood at the center of the breach. Gone was the brilliance of his armor, the fire of his wings, the gravity of his throne-born lineage. His body flickered, shifting between forms, thought. He had unleashed all that he was, and in doing so, he had become uncontained. No longer a teacher, no longer a son, only a memory at war with itself. Across from him, Madara knelt, one hand braced in the dust, the other limp at his side. His cloak, once flowing like a banner of intent, now clung to him in rags. His Rinnegan pulsed dimly, the eternal Tomo flickering like stars preparing to fade. The Susanoo was gone. Not broken, not dismissed, unwilled. He had not fallen. He had offered himself. He had let Magnus burn, because only in that fire could the question finally be answered. And now, there was only silence. It stretched between them. Not awkward, not cruel, sacred. The kind of silence that follows understanding. Magnus lowered his head, the firelight dimming. His lips moved, but not into words, shapes, symbols, remnants of a language once shared among brothers before betrayal made them enemies. "I see it now," he said quietly, as if afraid to speak too loud. "I see what I look like through your eyes." Madara looked up. No triumph, no vengeance, only breath. "And I," he answered, "see what I became in yours." There was no forgiveness. There didn't need to be. The duel had not ended with a victor because there was no one left to win. Just two beings, once men, once myths, who had pushed so far beyond identity that they met at the edge of unbeing. And the world could not contain them anymore. It began to fold, not implode, not disintegrate, just fold, like parchment in the hands of an unseen author satisfied with the ending. The memory engine pulsed once above them. A final flicker, a heartbeat that would never repeat. Then it was gone, not destroyed, dismissed, because it had learned what it came to learn. That no answer would ever be enough. That choice mattered more than outcome. That power, when unbound from purpose, eventually listens. Magnus took a step forward, not toward Madara, but away from everything. He looked to the sky, to where Terra might be, and then, through it. "I will return," he said. "To what?" Madara asked, rising slowly. Magnus closed his eye. "Not to command, not to teach, just to be there. Because no one else is Madara stood now, his pain no longer masked, his pride intact, but no longer blinding. "And I," he said, "will walk again in worlds not made for me." "Will they accept you?" "No." "Then why go?" Madara's lips curled faintly. "Because I remain." And with that the world died. The sky tore, not with violence, but with calm. Two lights passed through the breach. One red as memory, one violet as judgment. They did not vanish. They became part of the stars again. Somewhere far away, a scribe in a monastery wrote a name in a ledger that did not exist the day before. Somewhere deeper, a raven flew over the ruins of a dream. And somewhere else entirely, beneath the golden throne, a single wire sparked, briefly, before falling silent again. No trumpets, no legacy. Just the echo of two doctrines burned into the page of a cosmos too vast to choose a side. If one remembered, there was still fire, and two names, one from a world of jutsu, one from a galaxy of silence, now written into the myth, forever.